On this video, I'm going to tell you about how to increase your Facebook ROI every time using a thing called audience splitting. Now, what is audience splitting? This is basically where you take a Facebook campaign you're already running and you split it up into multiple little parts. To identify which parts are working better than others so that you can twist and manipulate the little parts, doing a little bit more on some parts, doing a little less on some other parts, to overall bring up the ROI of the campaign by redistributing budget that you had spent on that campaign already from the parts that aren't working average on the particular account or at the minimum standard you're looking for as far as ROI, and reallocating that budget to parts of the account that is working above average so you can double or triple down on them. I'm going to explain how I do that for our Facebook campaigns for our clients to shortcut the whole process and see kind of the template model that you can use basically that'll step up the ROI of your campaign every time, why it works, and give you some examples of where this has also worked in the past. So with all that said, I will get into the meat of the content here. Lots of people already know that what keyword you select on Google matters to your campaign profit a lot. Facebook operates almost the same in that regard. So in other words, first of all, the audiences that you choose on Facebook and the demographics targeting that you probably don't choose, because most people don't, is the key part in making a campaign actually get to the ROI that you're looking for. It's not, amateurs are going to do a Facebook campaign. It's not going to work the way that they want it to, and then they're going to hope over time the campaign improves, or they're just going to shut it off. With active management of that campaign, to identify the parts that can be cut out, like you're cutting out cancer from your body, you will be able to get the results that you want. It's just a matter of when. On Google, people seem to know this. There are certain keywords that work that you can identify, certain keywords that don't work, and then you just cut out the keywords that don't work. You've got a campaign that works. But for some reason on Facebook, people don't think about this, doing things the same way or the equivalent of that. Any display advertising that you do, i.e. non-search engine advertising, whether that's on Google Display Network or whatever, the biggest part of everything is finding the right audience. In other words, also being able to narrow down who you're targeting to enough, because if you narrow it down enough, there will be an audience within the great pool of people that you think might be a buyer that is profitable. And it's just finding out where that small segment of what you were targeting before where it is, then you'll be able to have a profitable campaign that runs and just spits out profit for months and years after you finally identified what that is for your market. Respectively, on top of that, on Google as well, a lot of times people know that you have to set different bids for, different device, what device the user's on, desktop versus mobile, and because they know that that's part of getting an actual good ROI on Google. Usually people, about 90% of people will just say, don't really understand that they should extend that on Google to identifying male versus female, or one age bracket over another age bracket works, so that they can cut out the parts that aren't working and reallocate their budget to the parts of the demographics that are. Certainly even less people are doing that on Facebook, which it's really tough to get Facebook to work if you're not doing that. So it's not about, though, trying to tweak and figure out what demographics are going to work good for you on Facebook. And it's not just focusing on what audience is going to work for you on Facebook. When you combine the two, that's generally where on most campaigns you're going to find some aspect of what you're doing that's going to work and be profitable for your business once you just test and find it out. I'm going to show you how to actually test and go through a very streamlined testing process with your Facebook campaign so you can figure out what will produce the profit that you want. Or if you are making a profit already, how you're going to get the profitability of it up to some level. Of course, if you're profitable already and you use these methods, you're going to have less overall sales. So there will be a point in which you have to run the math for yourself, in which it makes more sense to have more volume at a less ROI than more ROI on a less amount of volume of sales. And that can be done. I've talked about that in other videos. There's formulas that you can use online. There's peak profit estimators out there where you can plug in, sales versus ad spend, and as your traffic goes down and your ROI goes up, where you're going to actually where's the point in which you're going to make the maximum actual profit out of what you're doing, which is something else to consider. But with all that said, I'm going to show you the exact methodology I'm going to use walking into helping a client with their Facebook campaign when they say that the ROI isn't there. More often than not, when a client comes to me, their campaign isn't making money and they want to know how to have it make money. They're not over the mark in which it's profitable. And so for me, there's a number of other things I do, certainly as a go-to, but this one right here is the real foundation of what usually is done up front. If they've got a campaign that gets an ROI that's not like 0 or near 0, for me to be able to get it up to a point in which that it is meeting the expectations of the client as far as an ROI, pays for itself after the ad spend and after all the product or service delivery costs and so forth, which if you don't know what that is, you need to take a step backwards and figure out what that is for your business. If you're generating leads, you got to know how many leads you need to make a sale and what your average sale is worth and what your average revenue that's going to be netted on average per lead that you get, so you can at least have a target lead that if you reach that target cost per lead, you're going to probably get this much revenue, and this much revenue is required to pay for all my expenses and actually have money left over. You need to boil that down for yourself starting out so that when you go through this process, you know exactly what to cut out and what to keep, and are you on the right track, and does it look like are you making progress, and does it look like you're going to have something, if you keep going with this, that'll be worth the time and money that you spent to get it to where you need it to be at the end of the day. And with that said, generally you'll start out, you got to expect, like any of the Google ads or anything else you're doing really with PPC or online advertising, that it's going to start out usually not being profitable day one, and then you'll know your target cost per conversion that you need, and then everything that you do is just getting to that point in which you're going to every month try to get a better ROI than you had the previous month, and at some point, if you're doing that, you know that you will be profitable. And once that's happened for you, it'll probably be profitable for you years afterwards, which will pay for any of the few months that you had to pay running your campaign at a loss up front to get it there. And just figure what running your campaign at a loss as you're identifying what's going to work and what's not going to work as a price to build up a campaign that will go on long term to net you millions of dollars in sales at a profitable rate, and in which you've got a barrier to entry for other people copying what you do, because the average guy getting into it or gal, they expect it to work right away. So if they even try to do what you're doing, it wouldn't be profitable right away, and then they would give up before they ever got to the point where it was profitable, like you're doing, because you know that it's a process a little bit and that it takes some time to get things going. Facebook's got an algorithm. The algorithm, if you're using lookalikes targeting, has to figure out how to find you the right customers. If you're using regular audience targeting, not so much, but you have to find the right audiences that work, and along with that, you have to find out what the age and gender demographics that work for your unique offer, respectively. Well, and with that, this process here is my go-to to get to figuring out what are those exact, configuration of audience, age, or gender demographics that you need that's going to get you over the mark of meeting that level of ROI that you need to be profitable with your account after all expenses. Anyway, with that said, you can't possibly know which audiences will work the best when you get started. The average person that sets up a Facebook campaign, if they're not going to use lookalikes targeting, they're going to go in there, and if they're trying to sell, let's say, some football supplies, like jerseys and helmets and stuff like that. Let's say you do like custom, printing or whatever of that for, football teams and stuff like that. So they'll go in and they'll start with, because most people, I guess, don't know about lookalikes targeting right away. They'll go in, as far as they get to the targeting section of their account, at the ad group level, they'll start typing in stuff, high school football, and assuming it's, for a high school football and like middle school football and stuff like that demographics, not like beyond that college level or anything. And they'll start typing in things related to football, and they'll put like 5 or 10 of things in there. They'll run their campaign. They need a 5-to-1 ROI, $5 revenue to every $1 spent on ads to make the campaign profitable. They'll get a 1-to-1 return, and then they'll just say, man, this sucks, and then they'll just shut it off. Whereas, if you can get that kind of return for yourself, you should be already, jumping up and down for joy, because that's actually not a bad return, at least initially, and we can work on that through this process to get us the rest of the way to the full 5-to-1. So what I would recommend you do if you're in that type of situation, whereas I actually had a client like this that actually did what the example that I gave you. They sold to products to, at least not the exact product that I'm talking about, but sold products to for people that were in football, that sold products to that audience of people that are doing high school and middle school football. With that said, there's a whole bunch of different audiences you can pick. You could pick like the ones that are literally like, say, high school football. You could pick ones that are like for high school football coaches. You could pick audiences for high school football associations. And there's other audiences that are pre-built that right inside Facebook's system in which you can target. And some of them, you don't really know what they are, if they're going to work. That's totally fine. All you're trying to do with your initial startup money, which you would step into the process knowing your stuff's not going to work possibly for 3 to 6 months, have a budget you can invest to lose, and know you're going to lose up front to find that formula that's going to work and get you the return you want. Whether if you can afford to lose $10 a day, do $10 a day. If you can afford to lose $100 a day, you'll get to your end goal faster. Do $100 a day. But don't expect to see that money, because it's going to be your ticket to get to the configuration that actually is going to churn out profit on a regular basis for you after all of this. But if you were selling to football players at middle school and the high school level, whatever it is that you have, like this company I was working with had, you would find all the football related ones. You type in football and then you just start looking through everything. Facebook has tons of audiences anymore to pick from. It's like, you might find 100 plus relevant ones for your market. And so you'll go through and you'll just write them all down on a piece of paper. From that piece of paper, you'll try to group the ones that you have into certain groups. Like for that one example I gave you, we grouped the football associations in one group. Anything having to do with just football generic would go into another group. Another group about coaching goes into another group. And within that, now we have a general framework of what we know, and out of the universe of what could work. We can't possibly test everything as well, but we don't know. And I can tell what I said here. You can't possibly know what audiences will work when you first get started with your Facebook ads, because I can tell you tons and tons of times audiences that Facebook had that I had no idea, or I had no inkling, or had no thought whatsoever of was going to work, that I tried and ended up working anyway. Because the audiences, the way that at least they're described inside Facebook, a lot of times it's not what you think. So what you want to do when you go through this process is pick out stuff that's even remotely related to what you think has your customer, okay, or your niche. Within that list, You're going to look at all the possible audiences you can for your offer and pick out 2 to 3 from each group that you've made in that list. And set up your campaign to have one single ad group for every one of those ad groups you are targeting. Okay? So with that, okay, so you can't necessarily, because you're going to find like 50 plus different audiences most likely in a lot of the businesses that you're in. We don't want to split test 50 audiences to find out which audience will work, because the thing is, the more audiences that you test, the longer and more money you're going to have to spend in order to get to a point in which you are going to have what are called statistically significant results telling you which of those audiences work. So to shortcut the process, like I'm going to do, it's the easiest, quickest way, and without blowing through a ton of money to do it up front, or limits the amount of money you've got to spend up front to figure out in general it works. We're going to group them into groups, and we're going to take only 2 to 3 out from each group, so that at the end of the day, we're only split testing 10 of the 50 audiences that were in the general universe of our niche. And then we're going to run a campaign with 10 different ad groups that target each one of those individual audiences, which, it'll be 4 different groups, of which we had 2 to 3 from each group, total 10, audiences that we're going to test. Then we turn on our campaign and we just see what happens. You got to use a statistical significance calculator online to find, and of course you got to have your tracking set up so that before you run this test, you got to know what your cost per lead needs to be, or your cost per sale needs to be, or your ROI needs to be profitable after all your expenses before you start. Then you got to have your tracking set up to track what you're doing. If you're tracking leads, you only track the leads, and then from that though, you can figure out what your cost per lead needs to be to probably make money. After you figure out your close rates and all that, you calculate all that stuff up front, and then you run your campaign, and you just see which of your audiences get you to that cost per lead, or that cost per sale, or that ROI that you need at the end of the day. If you don't know what you could expect as far as an average revenue per lead and all that, average all your leads out over the last 3 years, what your average netting per customer, and same thing with the close rate. So you can kind of figure out what you need to pay per lead at the end of the day. And so when you've run this test, you kind of know, are you even in the general ballpark of something that might work, that you should keep, so that we can start cutting stuff out that won't work. And a lot of it won't work right away, but we're just starting the process of figuring out what could work, so we can use that information to further narrow down, which is all this is up front. We're not expecting it to work right away. There's more steps involved. There is a thing, as a side note, called offline conversion tracking, which does work for Facebook as well. So if you are generating leads, if you can take what is called the Facebook click ID. There's a little serial number tied to every user who clicks, so that when somebody fills out a form on your website, you can collect that ID as a part of a hidden form field, which that hidden form field pulls that ID out of your URL, which Facebook puts that code in the URL automatically. You get that ID and you hold on to it until a sale is made. Ideally the form goes into a CRM, which that little hidden serial number gets sent with all the rest of your leads details. When you have a one deal or a closed deal with that person, you can take that serial number and give it back to Facebook through their process for accepting it, and then you'll be able to see what your ROI is for that particular audience, not just what the cost per lead is, if you're skeptical as to knowing what your cost per lead needs to be profitable at the end of the day. If you're skeptical as to, you really don't know what a cost per lead needs to be, consider doing that. So you've got to run this initial test long enough to have statistical significance. Generally, that's going to mean several thousand clicks, and it might be $1 a click. So you're going to need a few $1,000s to get this kind of working, at least at the initial stage, which there's multiple stages here involved. Yes, it's expensive, but again, if it was easy, all your competitors would be doing it, and whatever you spend up front, you're going to be making that every month later on. So, consider it an investment. But let's say you have 5,000 clicks initially. Of those 5,000 clicks, you can see your 10 audiences. You'll have 500 clicks from each audience. You can have a general feel of, by then, most likely, what actually has the propensity to work, at least out of each group that you had, which of the 4 groups that you're generally testing 2 audiences from each group kind of worked and which groups did not work. Which is your whole goal starting out here. Okay? And you'll know if you can rely on your data about which groups work, have the propensity to work and which groups don't, by putting in your clicks and putting in your ROI or your revenue or your number of leads that you got in the statistical significance calculator, and find out if you have. I'm always going for 90% statistical significance, which tells me that that test I ran it's enough data to be able to actually accurately rely on this data and go into the next step with that data, so I don't end up going in and having false conclusions after all this is done, after this process is done. So with that though, you should be able to find out then, after like 5,000 clicks, which of those 4 groups of audiences kind of work. From there, I generally, once I find the group that works the best, I'll test all the rest of the audiences in that general group. So if we had 50 audiences to start out with, we put all those audiences into, let's say 4 groups or whatever, like we were talking about before. Those 4 groups, I find 1 or maybe 2 groups that actually got a return that was, okay. It's still horrible, nowhere near what the ROI need to be profitable, but they were higher than the other groups, which is mainly what you're going for. If we've had all the time where we've needed like a 5-to-1 return on a campaign. During the first step here that I told you, where we're testing out the different groups of audiences, we'll get a 1-to-1 return up front just through our initial test there, and we'll walk it all the way down to a 5-to-1 return once we've went through this full process. So that's what you got to know going in, that don't be affected by not getting what you want right away. You are paying to learn what works and what doesn't work. And then once you've paid enough, you've got what works. Bottom line. But anyway, if you go into step 2, you just pull out of the groups that you had. Okay, there's 4 different groups, so I'll go ahead and grab all the audiences in those. And that there's 2 groups that worked, if you will, or just for simplicity's sake, 1 group. We know which group worked the best. So we take all the audiences that we could find in that group, which is maybe 10 audiences, and then we run another test, testing all the audiences in that specific group, in which that group seemed to have worked the best itself. And then we'll run another 5,000 clicks, and we'll find the audiences within that group. Maybe it's the sports associations, or specifically related to football, that was the group of audiences that kind of worked the best of the initial 2 to 3 sports association audiences that we tested. So therefore, we find that out. Then we go into our next test where we get all the other 10 sports association audiences, and we just test all of those. And then from that, we'll find the top 2 sports associations that worked the best out of those 10. So we may only get a 1-to-1 return initially on when we initially test our different groups of audiences, but when we test the sports association list itself, now we have a 2.5-to-1 return. And within that, the top 2 are getting a 4-to-1 return already. So we already kind of see there that all we could kind of have to do is just pick out the top 20% of our second test, and we've got something already that now probably is real close, or in this case is real close to the end result that we want, which is a 5-to-1 return here at the end of the day. Once you've figured out which audiences within that general group that you tested in the first step that work, then you go into the final step, which is to test each of those winning audiences from the step 2 at every age and gender group you can as the last step. So what I mean by that is you're going to create another campaign for step 3, which is going to take those 2 best audiences you found from step 2, and then you're going to break up and create one ad group again for, which if I didn't specify it enough before on step 2, it's still one ad group for every audience that you're testing of the sports associations, like what I said before. We found the 2 sports association audiences that work the best. So for step 3, we're going to create, we'll start with the one of the 2 best producing sports association ad groups, and we're going to make an ad group for that name of that sports association ad group, and then 18 to 24. That same sports association ad group, 24 to 30, and so forth, and so that we can test each age bracket within that sports association audience. And we'll do the same thing with male and female. And to make this, the real way that you do this is you do 18 to 24 male, 24 to 30 male, 30 to 36 male, 36 to 42 male, and keep going. And then you do the same thing with female. And then we had 2 audiences that won from our step 2 test, 2 sports association ad groups. Within that, we're going to test each age and gender demographic bracket for each one of those. Okay? So you may have 20 ad groups that you're testing, because technically for each audience you're going to have to test 10 other variations of age and gender demographic combinations. With that, I would say I would create one campaign just for the one sports association, and then one campaign for the other sports association audience that you're testing, and to keep things a little cleaner. But within each those new campaigns that test one sports association, you're going to try every age and gender demographic the way that I lined it out for you, to find out which age and gender demographic is going to work the best within those 2 specific sports association audiences. So from within that, it's the same thing. 20% basically of your demographics are going to crush it, and you're going to have, a 6 to 1 return on 20% of those age and gender demographics on each one of those 2 campaigns that test your top 2 audiences, which were the sports association audiences. And you've got something that can forever then, from then on, produce a profit for you, a good profit for you, for, like I said, a lot of times it can go on for years and years. Assuming your campaign is not seasonal, which in this particular companies it was, because the football only runs certain times of the year. But realistically, that's what it is. Well, it's better than nothing. At least every year we got something that we have more ammo to get customers with, other than Google ads. I always like to do Facebook ads after Google, because Google works faster. There's generally more potential there. It's easier to get working, better return faster. Then I take my money and reinvest from the Google, and also I'll do Bing first. I'll do Google, then usually Bing. What works on Google will generally always work on Bing, and then Bing is a little bit better than Google in terms of the ROI. But then I'll take some of my money stash, get the Facebook campaigns to work exactly like what I'm talking about here, knowing I'm not going to know which audience and gender demographic settings are going to work until we've split tested it at least 3 different distinct times. And then we're going to find out the combinations of the audiences and the age demographics that work. And so at the end of the day, out of all the possible audiences and out of all the possible age demographics, there's only 1 to 2% that produced a return at least as good as what we need to be profitable, which is fine. It won't be, a lot of times game changing depending on the size of market you're in, but it will produce profit repetitively, like clockwork, from then on. Pretty much your competition won't be able to see what you're doing in terms of the targeting. It'll be all for yourself. It'll just bring in profit routinely, reliably from then on. That going a step backwards, though, usually if we get to that last step, and if we're shooting for a 5 to 1 return, and we find specifically that there was quite a few age demographics that work to get at least a 5 to 1 ROI, we'll pick the age and gender demographics that got the 5-to-1 ROI or greater. But we'll also go back to that ultimately that same group of audiences that we tested in step 2. And instead of just taking the top 2 audiences there within that general group I talked about of the like the sports associations, I'll try not the top 1 and 2 of the 10 sports association audiences, but the top 3 and 4, and then run a test breaking out all the age and gender demographics for each one of those 3 and 4 sports association audiences in terms of the 3rd and 4th most profitable one we had. And then maybe I can squeeze out some more profit from our overall experiment here by finding some age and gender demographics that will work for the 3 and 4. That would be the case if we find, let's say half of the age and gender demographics were a 5-to-1 or return or greater on the initial the initial 2 sports association audiences that we tested. Well, in that case, we probably know we can go back to our sports association audience list and get the 3rd and 4th most profitable one to work at least at some degree, because half of the 1 and 2 top most profitable sports association audiences worked. Half of that worked, half of it didn't. So probably 20% of the top 3rd and 4th most profitable sports association audience will work, and therefore we'll test and figure out which age demographics that we can get from the 3rd and 4th most profitable sports association audience to work, and then we'll have that as a part of our long-term campaign we can run. So that's the general formula that I would recommend to you if you're starting out. Again, don't get discouraged easily. It is a process. You'll have to lose some money to get it going. It might take you $10K worth of ad money to figure out what's working. But again, that might produce $3,000 worth of profit for you every month from then on. Your return after 5 years is 100 to 1. So you just got to put things into perspective. The people who end up in the PPC graveyard want it too quick and they want it too easy. They don't want to go through the process of figuring out what, doing the work to make sure their ad and landing page is better, but also go through the process of figuring out what parts of what they're doing just doesn't work, and what's that super small part of the total market that you can actually make a profit from. I talked about pre-populated audiences in Facebook. A lot of you guys are using lookalikes targeting, and with that, I also notice not a lot of people test the different lookalikes audiences, or they will do it sporadically. But what you definitely want to do with that is test 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x, 6x, 7x, 8x, 9x, 10x, and find out from there which ones are going to work. Ultimately, if you have a campaign testing 1 through 10x, specifically 1 per ad group, then basically you will find out, if I would basically exclude all the ones where you got 0 sales during your test. Any of the ones that had some sales, I would go into a second test, which we're testing all the age and gender demographics within those ones that did bring in some sales or did bring in some leads, and then find out which age and gender demographics will work for each one of those. Or if you want to be more careful with your money, you can start with the 1x and test 1x and all the age and gender demographic combinations for that. Find out which ones will produce an ROI that's above what you need it to be, and then you move on to 2x and test all the age and gender demographic combinations for that, and then grab the ones that work, and then go on to 3x, and then go on until you basically can't get any more age and gender combinations to work, and then you stop. Maybe you stop at 3x or 4x, not go all the way through 10x. It's the same kind of thing there. You're going to miss out on a ton of opportunity if you're just expecting to go after just 1x or 2x by itself, because the age and gender demographic settings matter a ton on Facebook. And so you may only be able to get 1x to work, but if you do the age and gender demographic split testing like I talked about, you would get some aspects of 2 and 3 to work, and basically make twice as much profit long term, because you figured out what part of 2 and 3x would work and excluded the rest, the age and gender demographics that would work there. But, and then with all that said, I would say if you're doing just the lookalikes targeting, 1x, 2x, 3x, whatever, consider testing, or just flat out start, also testing once you get that working, the pre-populated audiences that Facebook has itself. And if you're doing just the pre-populated audiences that Facebook has itself, start testing the lookalikes, because generally some aspect of both of them will work. It's just a matter of going through the process I gave you to figure out which combinations will work and which ones won't. And that you can, again, double how much you're making again on top, because generally one will work, the other will work. It's just to finding out which of the combinations of the age and gender demographics will work for each. But with the lookalikes, it's a little bit shorter of a testing process, whereas on the pre-populated audiences, because there's so many, and because it takes so much data to be able to figure out what's going to work and be able to rely on your data, going back to that whole statistical significance thing, you got to be able to have a system to be able to narrow down of 50 or 100 possible options on the pre-populated audiences. What are the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that are going to actually work? So that's the way that I do it, at least. That campaign where the client is selling to the football club, that thing just works like clockwork. You don't really even have to mess with it. Once this process is kind of done, we've found out which audiences will work for this particular product / service, basically what it is. It just works. And now we can work on the next thing. So we don't have to fiddle with it generally after this process is done. There's less levers and all that to deal with in Facebook. We can focus on making the ad better. We can focus on making the landing page better. But as far as the campaign setup with the targeting and all that, generally this is all you have to do. There's not any more real big levers that you can pull. So once you've made the ad, has got the click-through rate as high as you could possibly get it, and the landing page just converts it to as high as you could possibly get it, then we just move on to something else. Maybe we figure out how to get, Taboola ads to work for our business. You could watch my video about that. Or whatever other network. Or, haven't done Bing yet, let's work on this. It's a continuous process to build up a good amount of profit from online advertising. There's so much details that go into each step if you're going to get it to work. But if you're very methodical about what you're doing, you will find the aspects of what you have that works. Maybe it's just a sliver of what you tried out initially works, but you found it. Now you can move on to the next thing. So anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to give you as far as the information about how to improve your Facebook ad ROI through audience splitting. What I would do for your campaigns to get more ROI from it, and also to be able to increase your top line revenue, given you may not be doing lookalikes targeting and the pre-populated audiences, given there's a real straightforward process to get the pre-populated audiences to work, or you're doing the pre-populated audiences, you're doing it kind of randomly, you didn't have a real structured approach like I have. You can find the other ones that work, and you can actually spend more money because you've got rid of the part that doesn't really work that much. So you can go more aggressively at the audiences that actually are working good. And you can get the lookalikes to work because, like I said, generally now, or should know now, that if you've got the pre-populated audiences to work with the products, you got a winning product or winning service, that the lookalikes should also work as well. The lookalikes will take longer to get working. So when you do your split testing, you can also, you can do your testing as I gave you, but also sometimes it just, you kind of have to run the test for a little bit longer, given a brand new campaign doesn't work as good as something that's ran for 3 months already, which is the main difference between the pre-populated audiences and the lookalikes targeting. But beyond that, that's about as much as I can tell you about getting more revenue from Facebook ads, or just get a campaign up and going profitable for your business already. If you like this video, I have a ton of other videos on this channel about other PPC money making strategies. If you want to learn how to make more money with PPC, I highly recommend checking my other videos out. If you like the channel, I would recommend subscribing, as I come out with new strategies like this all the time for you to be able to review and make more money from your PPC. I'd appreciate it if you'd like the video, if you did get good information from it, so that I can help promote the video to other people who are trying to get Facebook to work. If you have any questions about this strategy, about split testing the audiences and hyper segmenting or segmenting through your audiences through Facebook and the demographics that you have, on how to do it for your unique situation, leave me a comment below. I get back to every single person who leaves me a comment on this channel, usually within a day or two time. And that said, I will let you go. I'll wrap it up with that. I hope to see you on my next one.